Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. My home thoughts turn to the match yesterday and how Germany launched a blitzkrieg on Brazil. The final result 7-1 to Germany, an extraordinary result in Belo Horizonte. The Germans have reached 12 semi-finals out of the last 16 World Cups, which is a remarkable statistic. They've gone on to play in 7 World Cup finals, winning 3 of them. I'll put up a photograph of the German team and then a photograph of Fernandinho just clutching the back of the net. Really was an incredible game. I stayed up to watch it up to 5-0, which took about 30 minutes, and then I went to bed. But most enjoyable, and they look extremely strong, don't they? I took this photograph last night as the sun was setting just outside the house. See whether you like it. And then I like that photograph I took of Hannah in the waiting room at Lower Wildlife Airport. Mikhail Lermontov, I don't know if you've ever read him, but he's a fabulous writer, Russian. In the first place, his eyes never laughed when he laughed. Have you ever noticed this peculiarity some people have? It is either the sign of an evil nature or of a profound and lasting sorrow. Political reflections, I was going back to the tweets sent out by @CIA, and one of them is, "No, we don't know where Tupac is." Thanks for making our first month on Twitter great. Today we take 10 minutes to answer 5 of the top questions you've asked. No, we don't know your password. We can't send it to you. Sorry, not sorry. CIA, sorry for not following you back, The Ellen Show, but if you visit us, maybe we can take a selfie. And I thought, it really is a unique public relations challenge. And I think the voice is actually just right, droll and a little bit sarcastic. Somali troops retake the stormed presidential palace. Mogadishu, Somali's government said its troops have retaken the presidential palace in the capital of Mogadishu Tuesday after militants forced their way in and exchanged heavy gunfire with troops and guards. Loud explosions, gunfire could be heard inside the heavily fortified compound, which has, of course, been subject to many attacks by the Al-Shabaab over the years. After more than 2 hours of fighting, Somalia's presidency said in a Twitter update that the shameful attack had been foiled by Somalia's armed forces and African Union peacekeepers. It said the attack is over and the compound has since been secured, but gave no details about any casualties or what happened to the militants. Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, saying in a radio broadcast that its fighters had penetrated the presidential palace. And my conclusions are that the Al-Shabaab have raised the frequency, the intensity, and the geographical spread of its asymmetric attacks of late. I found this quote by Joseph Stalin: "The easiest way to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will clamor for such laws if their personal security is threatened." Joseph Stalin. Interesting piece by a guy called Michael T. Clare. 21st century energy wars, global conflicts are increasingly fueled by the desire for oil and natural gas and the funds they generate, saying that Iraq, Syria, Nigeria, South Sudan, Ukraine, East and South China Seas, wherever you look, the world is aflame with new or intensifying conflicts. At first glance, these upheavals appear to be independent events driven by their own unique and idiosyncratic circumstances. But look more closely and they share several key characteristics, notably a witch's brew of ethnic, religious and national antagonisms that have been stirred to the boiling point by a fixation on energy. Saying that, in each of these conflicts, the fighting is driven in large part by the eruption of long-standing historic antagonisms among neighboring, often intermingled tribes, sects, and people. Iraq, Syria, clash among Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds, Turkmen and others, in Nigeria among Muslims and Christians, South Sudan between the Dinka and the Noya, Ukraine between Ukrainian loyalists and Russian speakers, East and South China Sea, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Filipinos. It would be easy to attribute all this to age-old hatreds as suggested by many analysts, but while such hostilities do help drive these conflicts, they are fueled by a most modern impulse as well, the desire to control valuable oil and natural gas assets. Make no mistake about it, these are 21st century energy wars. Saying that, oil and gas are still the world's most important and valuable commodities, and basically saying that, we are still in a very energy-centric world, talking about Iraq, Syria and ISIS. It says, it appears that ISIS sells oil from the fields it controls to shadowy middlemen, who in turn arrange for its transport, mostly by tanker trucks, to buyers in Iraq, Syria and Turkey. Nigeria and South Sudan. Conflicts in South Sudan and Nigeria are distinctive in many respects, yet both share a common factor: widespread anger and distrust towards government officials who have become wealthy, corrupt and autocratic thanks to access to abundant oil revenues. Boko Haram fighting to overthrow the existing political system, and saying, it's drawing strength from the disgust in the poverty-stricken northern part of the country with the corruption-riddled central government in distant Abuja. Nigeria is the largest oil producer in Africa, pumping some 2.5 million barrels per day, with oil selling at around $100 per barrel. That's a staggering amount of money. Then talking about South Sudan as well, the South China Sea, and saying oil fuels military power, national treasuries and international politics. It is a determinant of well-being, of national security and international power for those who possess this vital resource, and the converse for those who do not. And therefore, in the context of what my view is that the eastern seaboard of Africa is clearly the last great energy prize in the 21st century, and I believe this lake of hydrocarbons stretches from Mozambique up through Tanzania, Kenya and Somalia. I said that on June the 4th. And therefore, a sine qua non of President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. The reason being China's dependence on imported crude oil, and therefore imported crude oil from Africa, is increasing, and the US's, interestingly, is decreasing. I am also certain that the eastern seaboard of Africa from Mozambique through Somalia is the last great energy prize in the 21st century. Therefore, the controller of the Indian Ocean becomes kind of decisive, and with control, China can be shut down quite quickly. A sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. And I then said in another article, the pivot to Asia bears its fangs. One of the key elements of the pivot to Asia is the air-sea battle concept. This concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities and incorporates distant blockade operations. Given my belief that the eastern seaboard is a fabulous energy prize that puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into the geopolitical frame, if you are considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be upstream from here into Asia. Xi Jinping said history is history and the facts are facts. Nobody can change history and facts. This was at a morning ceremony in Beijing commemorating the start of what China refers to as the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. Anyone who intends to deny, distort, or beautify history will not find agreement among the Chinese people and people of all other countries, he said. A key military clash occurred 77 years ago yesterday as Japanese troops prepared to invade Beijing. The Chinese people's resistance against invasion is a heroic ode in which Chinese patriots were bathed in blood, Xi said, before more than 1,000 people. So he's become extremely forthright in these sorts of matters. And then I'll leave you with a sentence that I found in an article I was reading. The strange decision by the Barack Obama administration to let al-Baghdadi go from prison 5 years ago. And this is Badr Kuma, and he says, an altogether new interpretation is available today that the current turmoil in Iraq has been a carefully hatched plot by the US and its regional allies, especially Turkey, which is keeping a deafening silence on the Iraq developments. Currency markets, euro at 136.12, dollar index 80.18, it's pulled back from a 1.5 week high of 80.359 set earlier this week. Japanese yen 101.62, that's firmed up again. Swiss franc 0.8930. The pound, where they had some weak manufacturing numbers, but it seems very resilient, and that's a bullish signifier, 171.32. Aussie 0.9397. And this is all around business confidence, which rose to 8 in June. The Aussie got as high as 0.399. India rupee 59.84. South Korean 110.12. The Rial 221.24, Egyptian pound 715.13, and the South African rand has improved to 10.68.60. It jumped as much as 1%, and that was the biggest gain since June the 18th. And now we've been saying it was near the bottom of the range. It was overdue some kind of bounce. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and I think comments out of Lacquer in a speech that he's going to deliver in Charlotte, North Carolina, said sustained acceleration of growth to something over 3% in the near future is unlikely. So I think that sort of tempered the bulls. The minutes of the Fed Reserve's latest policy meeting are due later today. Euro dollar 136.12, inched at 1.1% higher, but lots of policymakers, including Mario Draghi, speaking today. Gold back above 1320 at 1323.435. A little bit of a sentiment change going on at the moment, isn't it? So, but let's see how that actually ends up playing out. Crude oil 103.52. I think it's very much at the bottom of the range, and really we could get any kind of big surprise coming out of that part of the world in Iraq. And I think, can you imagine what the price of crude would do if al-Baghdadi stands up in Mosul and says, we're on our way across to Saudi Arabia? I think you'd have an enormous reaction. James Delling-Pole, writing in The Spectator, says there are more Western aid workers in Africa than there were colonial administrators. Why did you leave us, said the old Sudanese man in Omdurman market. Things were so much better when you were here. He was talking about the British Empire, of course, and apologies if I've told the story before, as I know I have. It's just that it's such a fantastically satisfying way of winding up all those guilt-ridden post-colonial types who find a source of shame and embarrassment that the world's atlas was once half-covered pink. I don't, though, not at all. What shames me far more are the mistakes we're now making as a response to that guilt. We're still treating the Africans like children. We're still ripping them off. But where before we at least gave them a functioning administration and justice system and a passable transport infrastructure, now all we're offering is a bunch of Ruperts with SOAS degrees and sustainability, zooming around in land cruisers in search of hot French doctors from Médecins Sans Frontières to shag, while helping the local economy barely one jot. A few months back, Foreman and I appeared at then he says there are now 100,000 aid workers in sub-Saharan Africa, saying that this is more than, it greatly exceeds the number of foreign administrators engaged by the former colonial powers at the height of the imperial era, which is an extraordinary thought. Talking about the Chinese and the Saudis, saying, the West's two main neo-imperial rivals in the region are far more clear-headed and ruthless about the purpose of their African presence. For the Saudis, it's religious imperialism. For the Chinese, it's economic imperialism, he says. It's a very interesting piece, well worth having a look. Unease and uncertainty in Zambia over President's erratic behavior. This is the Zambian president at around 8 p.m. last Friday. Chilufya Tayali found himself camped out near the runway at Kenneth Kaunda International Airport in Lusaka. He is the executive director of the Zambian Voice, a local pro-democracy NGO, and he had received word that Zambian President Michael Sata would be returning home after a mysterious 2-week sojourn in Israel. And then talking about the fact that state media said he had arrived. This chap waited through all those hours until late at night, and he said the president never arrived. A lot of rumors going around there, and we'll have to keep an eye on that. China is selling $38 million worth of missiles, grenade launchers, machine guns, and ammunition to South Sudan's government. China North Industries Group Corporation, biggest arms manufacturer, shipped a consignment of weapons to South Sudan last month. South Sudanese Defense Minister General Kor Manyang-juk confirmed the purchase and said the consignment was ordered well before he was appointed in July, 5 months before violence broke out in the country on December the 15th. China is one of the biggest buyers of South Sudan's oil, which has fallen to about 160,000 barrels a day. South Sudan has spent at least $1 billion on weapons and delivery systems since the fighting broke out, according to a Western diplomat in Juba. And my conclusions are, the government in South Sudan has pivoted to China. And it's quite a turnaround from when I wrote that piece, South Sudan's Oil Cut-Off, Brilliant Negotiating or Suicide. And I was talking about how, South Sudan was very much a US ally. To wit, President Obama issued a memorandum in January 2012 by the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, including Section 503A of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 as amended, and Section 3A1 of the Arms Export Control Act as amended. I hereby find that the furnishing of defense articles and defense services to the Republic of South Sudan will strengthen the security of the United States and promote world peace, at the official text of Obama's decision. I said then that Sudan had become the epicenter of the US and China's collision in Africa. And it's interesting that I think, essentially Salva has moved closer to China. The question is, who's moved closer to the US? South Sudan headline on The Guardian: little to celebrate as war and hunger mar Independence Day. You can say that again. I'll put up a photograph of women awaiting an emergency food drop in Leer, South Sudan. Interestingly, trade between China and Portuguese-speaking countries totals $53.345 billion between January and May. Most of it's being uplifted out of Angola. South Africa and all share up 11.5703%, just off a record high. Dollar versus rand bounced off range lows. It's last at 1068.58. Egyptian pound just around the 715 level where it's been for a while. The Egyptian stock market popped 1.41% high yesterday and is currently up 24.27%. Sisi said this region is being destroyed right now and we should not let this happen. This matter concerns not just the Arab world, it concerns the entire world, he said, naming the United States, Russia, China, and Europe. Sisi did not name the Islamic State in his speech, but the mention of countries that are being destroyed and divided in the name of religion was a clear reference to the actions in Iraq and neighboring Syria. And in that regard, given the patronage of the GCC in particular and Saudi Arabia, he has struck, I find, a more granular note, and one which I agree with. He said the government's decision to cut subsidies for fuel and electricity were necessary to improve Egypt's budget deficit. Gulf Arab allies opposed to the Brotherhood have extended more than $12 billion in cash and petroleum products to help Egypt, but Sisi said reforms, not aid, were needed to ensure long-term stability. Our brothers stood by our side, he said, but for how long, and then what? Nigeria all shares up 3.706% this year, and at more than 5-year highs. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 11.142%, but you've lost nearly 30% on the currency. 8 people were wounded late Monday when unknown attackers hurled a bomb through the window of a restaurant popular with foreigners and wealthy locals in Arusha. whether it's Al-Shabaab or not, but that speaks to the point I was saying about increasing the geographical scope of their asymmetric attacks, Arusha. Djibouti scraps DP World Port concession, citing corruption. Djibouti's government said it rescinded DP World's concession at the Doralé container terminal after finding evidence of corruption and has begun arbitration proceedings. Angola's China trade links foster booming illegal ivory trade. Angolan craftsmen buy wholesale ivory for between $150 and $200 a kilogram, while the price in Beijing is $2,100 per kilogram. That note, I'll put up a photograph of the elephants as they cross the road in front of us in the Amboseli in September last year, and another of a single elephant, whose photograph I took. Kenya held its key lending rate to balance inflation and economy needs unchanged for a 7th consecutive meeting. MPC kept the key lending rate at 8.5%. The rise in overall inflation has slowed down. Confidence in the economy remains strong. I'm not sure about that. I think confidence levels have dropped lower. 250 people have died in attacks countrywide since September, when Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militants stormed Westgate. And now we've had this introduction of a Kenya bank's reference rate at 9.13%. It is being introduced as part of a new formula for commercial banks to price loans, as the government seeks to reduce commercial lending rates. I was speaking to Joshua about that yesterday. I'm not so sure it's going to have that big an impact. And I said, I think 2 days ago, that although inflation has picked up, the central bank would wait to see more data before making a move. So I saw no change. According to Twitter, leaflets were being handed round in Lamu, instilling fear in locals who are not originally from Lamu, basically telling all Christians to leave Kenya's Lamu island, to apparently cause an exodus of people. Put up a photograph of the setting sun in Lamu, and then another one of the dawn, taken out of my hotel room. Kenya's shilling was last at 87.803. Cedric Mohammed, whom I follow on Twitter, calls it the Teflon shilling. Indeed, he's right. Arabia All Share up 11.445% this year, up a marginal 0.18% yesterday. NSE 20 was up 0.15% yesterday, and it's still negative for the year, minus 1.015%. The market yesterday responded to the peaceful Sabah rally with a very vigorous trading session, where total turnover clocked 1.56 billion shillings. I found the political raison d'etre of the Sabah rally a little unfathomable, but purely from a headline event risk analysis, the peaceful nature of the rally is a big positive takeaway, and evidently the catalyst for yesterday's outsized turnover. The shilling has actually exhibited a lot of alpha in a world where most African currencies have been falling this year and exhibiting a lot of beta. Safaricom was unchanged at 12.75 on real heavy volume of 67.818 million shares, third highest volume of 2014. Share price is up 18.604%, going to an event they're having with KCB today at 12 o'clock, about which both the CEOs are quite excited. Uchumi finally got some upside price action and firmed 2.8455% to close at 12.65. It was trading at 13 at the closing bell. It might be signaling sell-side exhaustion. Diamond Trust Rights closed yesterday at 55. That's 2 back-to-back limit gains. But if you compare it to the ordinary shares, which are at 231, you've now only got a 4.76% discount if you're buying those rights to the ordinary shares, and I think that's a little bit rich. Ungia hit a fresh all-time high, rallied 6.29%, and has rallied an incredible 111.111% this year. Once again, I do appreciate the fact you stopped by. I am grateful.